lot of familiar faces in here. We've got a QR code. We've got a lot of slides today, so we got a lot of slides today, so we're gonna move forward fairly quickly. So if you want to take a picture of that, and then at the end of the presentation, we have a bit.ly code too. So we'll go ahead and get moving. So again, welcome to the Freedom of Information panel. My name is Jodi, Rave's and Mandan-Hidatsa and Lakota. I'm the director of the Indigenous Media Freedom Alliance, and then our panelists here are Marsha McLeod, investigative reporter with Winnipeg Free Press, Dillon Bergin, data reporter at MuckRock, and Francisco Vara-Orta with investigative reporters and editors. So we have a lot of great information to share with you. Just a little bit of background on the Indigenous Media Freedom Alliance. So our mission is research, advocacy, and nation building. And this presentation today is really focused on the nation building portion. We'll get more into that during the presentation, but nation building has to do with tribal sovereignty, and one of the pillars of tribal sovereignty we need to be considering is that third pillar, and that's our tribal leaders need to be acting in accordance to the will of the people, and that's where media comes in. And it's a really important part of all the work that we're doing. And then our vision is to just support and really foster the growth of independent media. So IMFA, our news website is Buffalo's Fire. Okay, starting off, reason we're talking about freedom of information records is we don't really talk about it because of 574 federally recognized, 5 out of 574 federally recognized tribes, and this is specific to the U.S., we don't have any freedom of information on. So this room might be packed if we practice freedom of information, but it's just sort of an anomaly in our communities, and we've got to change that, and we'll talk about how that might happen. So freedom of information in our communities, we'll be moving into our panelist discussion to show people how, even though tribes don't have freedom of information laws, there is a way that we can use it to our benefit using federal and state laws. And we'll talk about challenges here in the U.S. and in Canada. So Marsha will be covering Canada portion, so we're thankful to have that perspective also. So I'm going to start off. So you're in a community, you don't have freedom of information laws, where do you start? So that was my situation in North Dakota when a woman named Laura Bird, who is a tribal citizen of the Mandan-Hidatsa and Rickaron Nation, and she went into a business agreement with the 3 affiliated tribes business council and their economic development corporation, and things did not go well. They ended up telling her they weren't making money, and they wanted to force her out of her contract with the tribe because they just said, we're just not making money, that's not working. And at that point, she had already invested millions of her own money into this, it was a mining pit operation. In this particular case, she had in her buyout contract, they first offered her $5,000. Mind you, she had already put in millions. They wanted to buy her out for $5,000. She said no, they went up to $75,000. They ended up at $320,000 because she had an arbitration clause in her buyout agreement, meaning if they didn't agree on the final settlement, they could have a mediator to discuss what happened. I want to bring up Law 360. Well, I'll do it right now because oftentimes if we're in small newsrooms and we don't have the resources to see what is being filed in cases, so in our case, tribal court records aren't accessible, and you just can't go in there and see what's going on. For us, we only can get access to court records if it goes into district court, and some cases do go to district court. But one way that I found to be able to monitor this is our newsroom has a subscription to Law 360. Is anybody familiar with that? They're a news organization. I think they field of legal reporters, and they monitor the court systems. And I love them because as soon as a case is filed, like pretty much anywhere in the United States, they file a story like the next day or the same day. And if you're a small newsroom, you don't have the resources, you might consider a subscription to this, because then you'll get timely information. They have a lot of different areas you can subscribe to, and I subscribe to environmental and Native American. So anytime my tribe gets involved in a legal dispute, it's on Law 360, and I'll get a notification on that. One other thing with a part of transparency and accountability. At the end of all of our stories, we're a member of the Trust Project, which allows our readers to see, who our reporters are, what their bios are, what methodology and sourcing that we're using. And I like to add this one onto Lori's, just showing how long it actually took to cultivate this particular source. I'd met her in 2017. I didn't have, it was after I became aware of some problems with this mining pit or this gravel operation. I reached out to her. She didn't really have any records at the time, but she was working on it. And then it was 2 years before I heard from her again. She went off social media. She changed her phone number. She just kind of went off the radar. And then another community source said, Lori Bird would like to talk to you. This was like 2 years later. And it took almost 3 years from the first time I met her to get our first story published. But by then, we had amassed amount of records to be able to report on this particular story. Now, one of the persons that provided records to her was Brandon Bentley, with the little puppy there. He was also in business with the tribe on the same mining pit operation, and their company also had a dispute with the tribe, and they left in a kind of a disgruntled fashion too. And when Lori reached out to them saying, I'm trying to file a lawsuit against the tribe, can you help me out with anything? And they're like, yeah, Lori, you weren't losing money on that business operation. The tribe was creating hidden bank accounts and funneling profits that were supposed to go to your bank account to other bank accounts. And he had told this to her maybe about fall of maybe 2019, and in January, during this time, he had told the source, somebody told him there was a hit out on him. And he told them, well, they can't touch me, I'm a federal witness. And he was a federal witness in a corruption, federal grand jury investigation against the tribe. But in January, he was gunned down in St. Louis, shot multiple times in his truck and then dumped on the street in St. Louis, and his murder is still unsolved. So back to Lori's case, she had an arbitration clause. The mediator took a year on that decision, told her tribe has sovereign immunity, can't do anything. She appealed to the district court, took her case to the district court. They took a year, told her you don't have a case, the tribe has sovereign immunity. And she went to the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals. Again, they told her sovereign immunity, even though there is a lot of disturbing evidence in your filing, you can't do anything because the tribe cannot be sued. I'm going to go back to that. So what her case was, it was a civil RICO suit against the tribe for fraud and racketeering. So one thing we need to really be on the lookout for. So Lori's case is before the Supreme Court right now, and we all know that they're, you know, not very accommodating to meeting tribes' needs, and now this is the question that they have to determine if they're going to take this case or not. Does inclusion of a mandatory arbitration clause in an agreement with the tribe waive a tribe's sovereign immunity? This could be very problematic for tribes if the Supreme Court decides to take this particular case, because tribes have business contracts all over the U.S., and some of them are very big contracts, and now the court is going to decide how viable these arbitration clauses are, because right now the courts are saying, oh, arbitration clause doesn't mean anything, tribe can't be sued. So, you know, I've been talking about a lack of records, but just by doing the work in your own community, you can start to get the records. You can use court records. In this particular case, you know, we need to rely on our tribal citizens too. So Todd Hall is a rancher on the Fort Berthold Reservation, and I was a part of some email chains talking about another pipeline dispute, and I realized Todd is he's a rancher and a cowboy, and he's, you know, out with his horses and cattle and rodeo arenas all the time, but he's very, very astute and up to date on what is happening with our tribal government. So I asked Todd if he would start writing columns for us, and this was his response to Lori Bird's case, and he's like, you know, on one hand he's very supportive that, you know, our tribal citizens often don't have a voice because we have no freedom of information laws. Tribes are protected by sovereign immunity and can't get into federal courts. So he supports her in that vein, but on the other hand, it's like, okay, now tribal sovereignty and sovereign immunity is going to be before the Supreme Court. So what's going to happen? You know, what is this going to mean for tribes? So I talked about don't be deterred that you don't have freedom of information records, that your tribe doesn't have them, because we need to stick to those tried and true reporting mechanisms. So in my case, I was able to get bank statements, tax filings, arbitration agreements, court records. However, you know, I could take this one step further, because my tribe, you know, we're dealing with the Department of Justice and Interior Department. You know, we can file FOIA records, FOIA requests with these federal agencies, and that's one thing I think everybody really needs to be more proactive. If you're not used to filing FOIA records because your tribe doesn't have them, you can ask these agencies for their interactions with tribes and what they're doing with EPA or education or anything like that, and that we'll get into how you can file in Canada and in the United States. Okay, so we'll move on to Marcia McLeod, and she'll talk about access to privacy, information and privacy in Canada.
Guess I'm clicking the green button there. All right, hello. Just put up a little timer here. My name's Marcia. I work for the Independent Daily here in Winnipeg, the Winnipeg Free Press, as a investigative reporter. I'm a non-Indigenous journalist. I often report on issues. I don't think I need the mic. Everyone can hear me okay, or would you rather I use the mic? It's okay? Okay. Yeah, I often report on issues that affect Indigenous people and communities. So what I'll talk a little bit about is just access to information in Canada. Like in the States, we have one federal law as well as provincial and territorial laws. And so I feel like one of the big first hurdles is actually thinking like, okay, how do I even know what to request? I don't know what records the government makes and holds, and you know, the things that are being written on a daily basis that I could actually ask for. So what I do as just a, you know, kind of a part of my, I don't know, ATIP practice is like a couple times a month I search the Canadian federal government's previously released ATIP database. And so what's unfortunate about that is it doesn't actually include the records that were released. It just includes a summary of what the person asked for. But the thing is like, and apologies if anything I say sounds kind of elementary, but it's obviously not just journalists who are using ATIP. You know, it's First Nations, it's businesses, it's advocacy organizations, lawyers, and so sometimes the things I see on there are so specific. I'm like, whoa, that sounds like a really interesting story. And I personally believe the records should just be already online. So I just submit tons of requests on this database. And it's quite easy. You just click on it, you can see, like I have Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs Canada, CERNAC. It's one of the, for, you know, those of us visiting from the US, one of 2 federal agencies in Canada that have involved themselves in the lives of Indigenous people here. And so, you know, I'll search for CERNAC and like look at what's been released. And you can see I've clicked on that. That's just the first thing that comes up. I've clicked on that before. And I just read a little bit about what's been released. And I request things all the time. Unfortunately, it can take a very long time to even get previously released records, like longer than is supposed to be the statutory limit for a new request. So don't expect to get the records tomorrow. Another thing that I do, which is new and kind of cool, is the Globe and Mail national newspaper in Canada has done this huge project where they are putting together basically this massive database of request summaries that people, like records that people have requested, but not just federally, but also from the provinces and territories. So it has about 3,000 request summaries on there, and I've really enjoyed using that as well. You can see in this picture I have Manitoba selected. And I've been going through that, and I'm like, oh, I want to request that, I want to request that, I want to request that. Because a lot of it is I just learned about records that I hadn't heard of before, I didn't know existed. I'm like, oh, I didn't know that this kind of record is created in this kind of situation. And so unfortunately, again, it's not like the records are there, but they show you the text that was submitted by the person. You can see if it was granted, how many pages were released, like if something was refused or 0 pages were released, I obviously don't request it. But then you can submit a new request saying, hey, I want what this person already has. So I do a lot of that. Where to file? So it's kind of confusing sometimes, but the federal government has 2 online submission portals. The first one is the Treasury Board portal. You can just Google ATIP Treasury Board and you'll get it. And so to file an ATIP in Canada, you have to be a citizen, a permanent resident, or somebody who's present in Canada. So I'm sure anybody who's present in Canada at the moment can file a request. So I go to the Treasury Board first. And basically, you know, there's just a lot of things you have to click through, but you click make a request, and then it's going to ask you, do you want access to general records or do you want access to personal records? So there's a difference between general and personal. Personal, it's like if you were requesting something about yourself specifically, you can prove it's about you. You're like, I want my file about me with IRCC, like Immigration Services. Most of the time you're going to be looking for general records, so you click on general. And then, yeah, it'll want you to make an account. I never make an account. It's annoying. I think complicated. So you just click continue as a guest. You gotta validate your email, and then you can go forward and submit your request. If you cannot find the department that you want to submit to in the Treasury Board portal, you can try the link below. It's the older system. And yeah, so I just go. If you prefer not to create an account, that's what I do. I'll go back. But for CERNAC or for Indigenous Services Canada, they're both on the Treasury Board portal. CERNAC and ISK used to be one department. They were split, but they still share an ATIP coordinator and an ATIP director, and they have the same ATIP analysts. And so sometimes you're like, okay, should I submit this request to CERNAC or should I submit it to ISK? But on some level, you could just include in your request, I expect the departments to search the records of both ISK and CERNAC. And sometimes they'll even just do that for you anyway. They'll say, oh, we've kind of submitted this in the interest of basically the duty to assist. They'll say we also submitted this to CERNAC if you submitted it to ISK. So I won't go through this too much, but it can be difficult to find where to use the online portals in the provinces. So I have the links. This is kind of annoying, but I have the links are embedded in the arrows. So if you hover over the arrows, they'll pop up. But in Ontario, there's a online portal for some agencies, not others, and in Manitoba, there's an online portal for some and not others, and it's not that many. If you don't see an agency has an online portal to submit your request, it does not mean they are exempt from freedom of information. It just means they don't have an online portal. And so usually you can find the email of the ATIP coordinator and just submit your request via email to the coordinator. They may say, you have to mail it in. I just always submit by email first, and if they create a problem, then I deal with that. So let me just check the time here. I'll just quickly go through 2 examples of stories that I did that were based on access to information records. And so this is a story I wrote for the Globe and Mail about First Nations children and the denial who are their families or a healthcare provider in their life is submitting what's known as a Jordan's Principle request on their behalf. And it's from an obligation that the federal government has to provide services and supports to First Nations children and avoid delays in jurisdictional wrangling. And I actually had been going through previously released ATIPs, and I saw one request that basically asked for just information about denials of Jordan's Principle requests. I was like, oh, I want that request, so I got the request, I got the documents, and then I thought, okay, I just want the information to be a little more up-to-date. So I filed another request just asking for a bit more up-to-date records, but what the documents, even the initial ones that I got showed, is that the denial rates were extremely disproportionate across the country. So, 2% denial rate in Manitoba versus, 41% in the Northwest Territories. And so that was the initial request that I saw online, number of requests denied by Jordan's Principle. And then that was my the request that I followed with asking for more records. And I'm, giving a date range, so I'm seeking reports dated on or after May 4th, 2021. And I'm describing what some of the records look like. I could have improved my request, and this is a bit of by just saying, I want the same records as you already released in insert file number, but with this date range, because they actually did follow up with me and say, like, we're not sure what you're looking for, and then I provided the file number. So that would have been more expedient if I'd just done that to begin with. But yeah, and this is what some of the records look like. And in the request that I filed, we got about 600 pages of records. Here's another example. So sometimes when we're submitting requests, people are like, you have to know exactly what you're looking for. I don't totally think that's true. Or not that people will say that, but sometimes I think there's the idea that you have to know exactly what you're looking for. So sometimes I submit requests where I'm like, I want this audit prepared by this on this date, right? And sometimes I submit requests that are like, I'm searching for any and all documents related to this known problem. And I always do include a date range, because otherwise that's when your request is going to become problematic, or like they're going to be like, we can't do this, or it's going to take, forever, even though, they already do take forever, but I do always include a date range, even if my request is a little bit more in the fishing category. But so, when I was working at the Globe and Mail, I was trying to figure out who the ATIP director was for ISP and Cernak, because the information wasn't up to date online. So I just found myself calling around, and I was calling Cernak's Public Inquiries Contact Center, which is kind of the main line, again, for those visiting from the States, kind of the main line they have to field inquiries about status applications, secure status cards. And so I was calling, and I was on hold for about 40 minutes, and while I was on hold, I was like, I sent in this request, because I was like, man, I'm like taking a really long time. And it turned out the records, so this is kind of a typical phishing request of mine. Documents, memos, briefing notes that discuss X topic, blah, blah, blah. Please search your records from 2021 to the present. And it turns out the records that they got to me were quite a bit more broad than I even had requested, because it was all kind of being discussed together. And and it revealed, that the federal government was extremely aware that they had created a very complicated and lengthy process for First Nations people to apply for status, and they were at risk of media scrutiny over their system, and as well, that people were dealing with extremely lengthy delays in these processes. And again, they were aware, could be construed as a form of systemic racism on the part of the government of Canada. So that was just an example of another story that kind of came out of a bit more of a phishing request. And I track my requests using like a database that looks like this, and I use kind of simple Google Sheets formulas to help me keep track of things. So that's just the last thing I'll say, and I'll pass it off to Dillon.
That's how that should work. So I'm going to try to do this without the microphone, but I am a little hoarse from yelling so much last night during the jig. So I may switch back to the microphone at some point. I'm going to talk about public records, a little bit of 101, especially because I work with MuckRock. I guess following that up, how many people here are familiar with MuckRock or have heard of MuckRock? Okay, that's probably what I expected. We do a lot of things to help solve some of the problems that Marsha was talking about in where should you file, through what portal, what if they ask for it through mail, how do you follow up on it, what if something gets stuck, or what kind of other hiccups you would have in the process. And then I'm going to talk about some of my specific reporting and public records requests on things related to the environment, just to give kind of a framework of like, here's some things I've learned about like thinking about where the documents you're looking for live, and what type of processes you might be interested in from an accountability standpoint. So yeah, first, MuckRock. We are essentially a place to find and file public records requests. In 2010, the founder of our organization had a lot of experiences like Marsha was describing, and had the idea, what if we set up a portal that just kind of wraps all the requests that people in the United States could be filing, and gives them a home where people can find and see them later and see how the agency responded, and just see the whole life of a request. So you can file through our website. You can see some kind of facts here. Since then, we have helped file over 100,000 requests. 37,000 have been fulfilled. That's over 8 million pages and 4,000 plus verified newsrooms on Document Cloud, which is a part of MuckRock and where all the documents released as a part of these requests can live. So if you go to our website, that's what it looks like. Smack in the middle of that is the file request button. Right now, I know to file 4 requests, it is $20. That is because we have a support staff that then kind of shepherds those requests through all the possible hiccups you could have. We have proxies in states like Tennessee that don't allow you to file in that state unless you're a citizen in that state. So we have 3 people on our small support staff, and the money that it takes to file a request is just paying their salaries. But what is always free, and is I think really the strong part about MuckRock, is even though you pay to file a public records request, what is free is the whole life of all those requests. So you could go onto MuckRock right now and see, I don't know, how many is that? 125,000 documents, or 125,000 requests, and you can see all the documents or data related to those requests. So even before I worked at MuckRock, when I was a local reporter in New Mexico, one of the things I would do is go into MuckRock, just kind of like what Marsha was describing, and search through all these requests. If there's a topic that I'm reporting on or something new that I'm starting project-wise, I would just search it in the search bar, whether it's evictions or air pollution permits, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later, and see the language that people used. And for me, that was a really great way of figuring out, like, okay, this is how people describe where different documents and data live inside of an agency. And I still do that whenever I'm working on a new topic. I'm like, someone's probably filed a request on this. Let me just copy the language. And again, even if you don't file through MuckRock, you can just go find the kind of request you're interested in, copy and paste the language, and submit it yourself. So this is what it looks like. These are a few requests that I filed. Again, you can see the exact language that I used, and then you can see how the agency responded to me, and then see what documents or data they gave me as a part of that request. And every public request on MuckRock has that. So again, I think really the strong thing is seeing the whole life of a request. Document Cloud is a place where all those documents can live. It is a way to share documents with your readers or with your colleagues, to analyze documents, There's a lot of different things you can do with Document Cloud. I'm not going to go into all of them. But basically, this is what it looks like when you're on Document Cloud. You can see there, this is a document for a project we worked on with the Missouri Independent and the AP on nuclear waste in Missouri. And there were over 200,000 documents as a part of that project. We were analyzing from 1940 to present. Luckily, I'm not the one who spent months and months of her life. There was another reporter who did all of that. I was just kind of in the background helping with other things. But she put all these annotations in and tagged the documents in different ways, and then we were able to get those tags and notes out of Document Cloud and organize them separately as we were looking at timelines of things. And we were able to do that through these things called add-ons, which are a new part of Document Cloud that we've been developing for a few years, that are open source add-ons or things you can do to documents that will help you analyze documents in different ways, or even just get them uploaded onto Document Cloud. There's an add-on for .msg files, which sometimes when you ask for emails from an agency, you get them as .msg, and they're hard to open, and they're not like PDFs or something you could analyze. There's an add-on for just uploading those and extracting them onto Document Cloud. There's lots of other add-ons. Again, I won't go into all the different types of add-ons we are working on, but you should check them out. And if you have any feedback, you can join our Slack, and there's a Slack channel specifically for add-ons. There's also, I guess, the one specific one to mention as well for transcribing interviews. I know a lot of reporters here, probably in the audience, use a transcription service that either costs you or your newsroom. We have an add-on there that uses an AI called Whisper, and it basically runs Whisper for you. You can give it a Google Drive link, then transcribes your interview and puts it into your Document Cloud. So I no longer pay for Otter. It's pretty awesome. And then you can annotate your interview and share it with your editor in Document Cloud. We also have a news team, which I'm a part of. And basically what we do is help partner newsrooms find the public records that they're looking for to do the reporting they want to do. We have a couple different topical areas we're working on, but as you can see, we've worked with newsrooms across the country, including the California newsroom in California, which is a conglomeration of NPR stations, Chicago Public Media, and the Chicago Sun-Times in Chicago, as well as Cicero Independiente, which is a smaller newsroom right outside of Chicago, and Stat, and worked on a variety of topics, but mostly in the categories of environment and health right now. And so that's going to bring me to the kind of more involved part of my presentation. I'm taking some of the work that I did on air pollution and trying to describe exactly how I thought about the documents that I was getting and how they fit into the broader process of accountability for environmental issues. And I'm going to describe them a little bit, and hopefully that'll give you a framework for thinking about public records related to accountability on your beat, even if it's not air pollution or the environment. The first thing I'm going to start with is the document state of mind, accountability state of mind. I'm sure a lot of you have heard the document state of mind quote. Older editors especially like to say that you should have a document state of mind. You know, you should be thinking about the documents here. You know, where are they? And I think also part of that, though, has to be the accountability state of mind. And the way that I think about this is actually similar to what some of the panelists were talking about yesterday in one of the legal sessions, which is what is the gap we're looking at here between what is supposed to happen and what actually happens. So I think of the accountability part of this as, yeah, looking at the gap for what is supposed to happen or the rules, and what often happens, someone breaks the rules, and then the data and documents that would be produced about both. So we were working on a project, like I talked about a little bit before, with Chicago Public Media about air pollution. I was analyzing a lot of data from all these sensors across the city, looking at which neighborhoods had worse air pollution. That was mainly at the beginning of the project. As the project went on, we wanted to think more about, let me check the time here. We wanted to think more about the types of accountability angles we could incorporate into using the data and understanding the data in relation to what types of polluters are in what areas and what are we seeing in those areas on the ground through the observed data and also through the public records we found. The fun part about working at MuckRock is I had that idea, and then my boss was like, yeah, you should go research that and then write some guides. So basically, to research for that reporting, I wrote these 3 guides on air pollution and public records, which you can find on our website, basically describing a lot of what I found. Also, shout out to IRE. I spent a lot of time going through tip sheets and award submissions from previous years, finding reporters who had reported on air pollution, calling them up and asking them, how they got the documents and data that they cited in their awards. And so then to come back to that kind of framework I was thinking about earlier, I separated these public records about air pollution into these categories. So the rules are often in environmental planning and environmental processes in the United States. They are through planning and permitting. Planning and permitting usually trickle down from different important legal statutes. For air pollution, it's the Clean Air Act. And the Clean Air Act says, okay, here's how you have to plan for air pollution. And when you plan for air pollution, then you have to permit people. So just kind of like if you're thinking about parking in a given neighborhood, if you were to plan neighborhood parking, you would say, okay, here's the areas where we're going to allow neighborhood parking, and then we're going to give people permits to park in that area so that we know that the right people in the neighborhood are parking in their part of the neighborhood. Same or similar with air pollution, you have planning, and the question that drives that is, how is my local government planning or not planning to protect the health of members of my community? And then you have permitting, what does my local government permit to be polluted in light of those plans? Then you have the other part of that, when someone breaks the rules, the enforcement. So what mechanisms are in place to ensure the guardrails defined in planning and permitting work how my local government said they should? And again, what I often look for in my public records reporting is the gap between those two things. I'm going to quickly go through some different types of documents you can find specifically about air pollution in those categories. For planning, again, trickling down from the Clean Air Act in the United States, you have state implementation plans and air pollution control plans. Those are basically just the high level, like, here's how bad our air pollution is in our state, and here are the kind of guardrails we have to work in, taking that into consideration. You also have environmental impact statements. Usually those are produced for any type of project on public land or any kind of very big, high investment infrastructure. You also have health studies that could be commissioned by your local health department. On the left here is an example of a state implementation plan for New Mexico related to ozone, and an environmental impact statement for building a high school in Hawaii. And then you have permitting. You have air pollution permits in general. Basically, the Clean Air Act stipulates that facilities have to submit these to local governments, saying, here's what kind of equipment I have, and here's how much pollution they produce. They're self-reported, so that has to be taken with a grain of salt, but in general, they outline what they should be polluting. These other 2 types of permits are really interesting, especially for investigative reporting. One is called startup shutdowns and malfunctions. That's basically like the oops permit. Like if you mess up big time, you have to, or you should, submit that to your local government saying, we blew a fuse last night and a lot of lead came out of our facility and into the air into the neighboring community. Another really interesting one is called a new source review. And basically that's saying, again, going back to what should happen, they decide they want to have certain types of equipment, so they submit a permit. They want to expand that equipment, so they have a new source review permit. This is really interesting for capacity creep that can happen at industrial facilities. So they say, this is what, oops, wrong way. They say this is what we will be polluting, or what we will be emitting at our facility. And then a few years later, they add another machine, and another machine, and another machine. And it's expanded beyond what their original permit is. They've just done it over time. Here's 2 great examples. Again, when you get these slides afterwards, I would definitely check them out. One is from the Texas Tribune from a while back, using basically the Texas version of the startup shutdowns and malfunctions permit. And one is just generally looking at how different parts of Michigan, by different racial demographics, are allowed to permit, or how facilities are allowed to permit more in those neighborhoods than others. And then you have enforcement, which could be complaints, inspections, violations, and lawsuits. Complaints are, in the United States, often done in cities through 311 numbers, and you can access those and see what people are complaining about, either through like a text hotline or calling in to complain about in their neighborhood. And that can give you a general idea of like, okay, this is what's happening on the ground that some people are concerned about. Inspections or violations are often a step up from that. So following up on a complaint, sometimes officials will go to that facility and then inspect what supposedly happened. If there was something weird that people in the neighborhood were saying, something smelled weird, and so they go and they see and make sure all the equipment is running how it should be. Those are kind of inspections and violations documents. Lastly, then that goes all the way up to lawsuits, which could contain a lot of the previously mentioned documents. This is 311 complaints that I got back. You can find it in the MuckRock portal. What's interesting is you would see two requests. I first requested all of these 311 complaints, but what they gave me actually was the reports from the investigators following up on 311 complaints, and not the 311 complaints themselves. So then I had to go back to the agency and say, hey, this actually looks like these are written following up on a complaint. They're describing the complaint, but I'm asking what citizens themselves were complaining about. I want the raw text. And then so you can see once I got the raw text, it looks like raw text. Lots of people are typing things in all capital letters because they're concerned. And it's important to see that kind of raw, like this is what people were actually saying on the ground. But sometimes you have to, again, look very closely at what you got and say, does this really match what I thought I was going to get? And that's it. Right into the end. I will pass it off to Francisco.
Okay, all right. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Francisco Vara-Orta. I'm the Diversity and Belonging, Equity, and Inclusion Director for IRE. It's a mouthful. I've been with IRE 5 years doing training, and the backbone of IRE has been public records. And so I'm coming to you with kind of a broader appeal. It will be a little US-centric in some ways. But it's about problem solving, which a lot of FOIA negotiation is psychological. It's relationship building. So we're going to talk some tips through that now that you've seen some really great examples of like a pathway on how to get records. A lot of times it's like, well, how do I get started? And like the first challenge will come up and you're like, oh my gosh, what do I do? And just to reiterate for those that joined us a few minutes after we started, we have a bit.ly at the end of this, so you'll be able to get all the slides. And we had a QR code at the beginning, so if you want to, tag a buddy in here and find out, get a copy of that QR code, you can do it too. But it will have all this info in it, so don't feel like you have to take a lot of notes. And I have cards over here too if you need anything, anytime at IRE. My background was in education mostly, so sometimes I give a little bit of examples with that, covering mostly K through 12. But I think, of course, you've gotten a little bit of background here on the systems, and so just again to reiterate, if you're completely new to FOIA here, and I won't out anyone, but if you've never filed an open records request, you're not alone. A large number of journalists never do that. They haven't done that. They haven't needed to do that. But as you start digging deeper into the topics you care about, a lot of times you know that information, the hardest information is a lot of times kept private for a reason by people in power. So you need to use these mechanisms. So a lot of times when you're dealing, particularly in our historically excluded communities, you are dealing with federal agencies and trying to get long time data over the years or information. Just keep in mind though that covers executive branch agencies only in a lot of cases. And then of course each state has their own law, so I wanted to just show a couple of graphics here, and there'll be these links as well. But if you're just curious to know the state you're working in, what it's ranked as, this is from the Center for Public Integrity based in DC. They do great work covering a lot of historically marginalized communities, and they've really diversified their staff. And so I like this project because, if you're just like a newbie to some of this, or let's say you're doing interstate reporting, which can happen when you're doing like a regional topic, or you're trying to do a nationally aimed story, too that work from mainstream outlets, and so I just want to, kind of acknowledge some of that here if you're just trying on your daily beat, whether you're covering our communities or not, how to go about it. Another challenge we'll talk about is time and money. Isn't it in life always time and money? And so you always want to know the amount of time it takes to get back a request. So doing your homework is always the first step. And then, of course, how much it'll cost. And always saying, like, this is in the public interest. You're not doing this for profit or for gain. You're doing it to help your community. It's really key. Is anyone here familiar with record retention schedules? Okay, yeah, so I see some heads nodding. And so for me, I did not know about record retention schedules till I was already a decade into my career. But essentially it allows you to see how long agencies hold on to records. So if you're doing a data project specifically, I've made the mistake where I'm gonna go and find longitudinal data for this issue going back 20 years. And it's the agency only keeps records 5 years. And it's different in every state, it's different for federal agencies. So make sure you look that up before you do your story pitch to your editors, or before you put in your request, because they'll be like, sorry, we're not required to give this to you. And that could delay it further. Also, Google is your best friend in the search for FOIA, for public records. Does anyone use Google Advanced Search? Okay, I see some folks. So we're trying to stay on time because we got a lot to get to. So normally I do a demo, but if you go to Google Advanced Search, just even type it on your phone right now, if you just want to experiment with it, you can see that there are options to search for PDFs and XLS files and CSV files. And those are the databases and a lot of times raw documents that are posted somewhere on a site. And so you may be like, I want a copy of the report from the Bureau on this. And they're gonna delay it, or they just can't get to it. Well, maybe it's somewhere posted buried on their site. And if you use Google Advanced Search, it will find it for you and bring it up. Sometimes when I'm writing about, because I just love to torture myself as a journalist, and I write about a lot of marginalized issues and communities, data isn't always great. So sometimes I rely on a government report to then find footnotes, to find their data sets and academics that are studying it, and then I start building my sourcing from there and my database. So Google Advanced Search has been really helpful toward that. And I just want to preface we're going to enter the challenges section now, and then we're going to go straight into questions after this with this esteemed panel, because we've all dealt with challenges. I don't want you to get discouraged when you get that first no. As Lady Gaga says, there can be 99 people in a room that say no. One says yes, you get what you need. And so, still have to get a gay trainer. But seriously, you put in a bunch of requests, one may come back, but hey, that breaks part of the shell of the issue. So it happens to journalists all the time. Do not get discouraged. You're not alone. You're in this community with all of us here that can help you navigate this, because a lot of times people in power do not want to relinquish power. They feel threatened when questioned. So roadblocks are common. The first one you'll get is sometimes usually a really vague one. And so then you just need to kind of know the laws of the space that you're working in, and just cite them and say, this is kind of generally what I'm allowed to do or not to do. So this one is always open for debate, and we can talk about this too. I don't know how y'all always feel about this, but why do you want this information? What's your angle? I usually would tell people, because I usually don't have everything, and I'll say I'm not coming into this biased. I don't know what I'm gonna discover. I've heard this, I have evidence of this, but I am painting this large mural, and right now I only have 25% of the painting. So I'm actually giving you the opportunity and the power and the voice to tell me, what do you think is the full 75% I'm missing? And so there are cases when you're dealing with people's safety, particularly livelihoods, that I do feel like I withhold if it's meant for their security or safety. But for generally, I'll be like, yeah, I'm looking into school discipline rates. There's parents that have been reaching out to me that they're Black, they're Latino, they're Native, they're Asian, and they are experiencing higher rates of discipline in their school. I don't know exactly how true it is yet, but this is what the data shows. And so I'd like to talk to you about this issue or this trend on your campus or in your community. And sometimes people will be like, oh, okay, well, yeah, the data does this, but we have a smaller number of students from this demographic, so then the percentages go way up, and the story changes. So it's important to kind of keep that in mind. So I think, from the readings I've done on FOIA, when you're doing verbal interaction, honey gets you more people, not necessarily the vinegar. When you're doing written requests, the vinegar gets you more responses. I don't know why, but for some reason, just the seriousness of it, the lawyers take it seriously. And so you kind of have to adapt your approach to open records work with your personality, with who you're dealing with on the other side. But at certain points, you do need to feel comfortable asserting yourself and using maybe a little bit of sass, particularly when at that point you're being given the runaround. So this is one response that one of our data journalists gave us that I really appreciated about when you start to get the response like, oh, sorry, we just can't do that. It's like, well, are you sure? I'm not really asking for that. This happens to a lot of journalists. Has this happened to any of y'all? PDFs? So there are programs to extract data from PDFs. They're messy, you have to clean it up, they're a pain in the butt. And honestly, there's no agency now that doesn't have the raw data to do their own work. And if they don't, that is probably a story in itself. But I would feel like, you just have to kind of, if they're not used to getting data requests from you, and we take for granted sometimes in our spaces where we get to have these great conversations that there are places that are just not used to some of this. And so, you kind of are trying to help build that culture, not just internally in your newsroom or, as a freelancer, kind of in the spaces you work with and the organizations you write for and with, but also the entities that you're covering. And so they can get defensive. And so sometimes you have to really lay it out. And you have to be as specific as possible, because sometimes the people that are the spokespeople for a community aren't necessarily the ones that are handling the data requests. And they're like, oh, I don't understand any of this. So it's like, here's the language, run this by them. And they'll be like, oh, okay, yeah, like, for some reason we still use access. So I will get you an MDB file. You kind of need to know a little bit of reporting around how the systems work that you're covering to know how they store information. And then usually the IT people, the tech folks will be like, oh, this person knows their stuff. And so it makes it easier for them. So if any of you have been around the IRE night park space, you know that there's a little bit of sass in our community sometimes. So this is another tip from another journalist. So again, you have the power of the pen, right? And so, hey, it might be worth looking into. Okay, so this is a little bit of an exaggeration. There have been a few requests that are out there in our tip sheets that didn't quantify this. If any of you have ever tried to get concert tickets on Ticketmaster lately, it feels like this. So, if you're still in that good faith phase, like this is where negotiation is, and I like working with, when we're in these spaces where we're from communities or covered communities that have been marginalized. It's like we have to take kind of liberties with approach sometimes, and the psychology of how we work with people. These are people at our grocery stores. They're people that we've known for years, right, in some of our communities. And so, it's a negotiation process. You may be entitled by law in some spaces to get that information. Doesn't mean they have to hand it over to you a certain way, at a certain reasonable fee. Some of it is really just trying to win people's trust. And that's what I think a lot of this comes back to, is just trust building in our communities. So, I think, again, this is where you really got to get savvy about negotiation. Yes, that is hyperlink, so there is a story there. And so Dave Collier, who was a professor at University of Arizona, is now running Freedom of Information Center in Florida. Really nice guy, great ally, lets us use his materials all the time. He's the one that did the study about, is it better when you're verbal to be a hard ass or not versus in written form, and him and another professor. And so he gave us some of this information and said, essentially write an estimate out. Okay, how much does printer paper cost? How much does ink cost? How many pages do you think the request is going to be? Let's send them a labor? How many hours? Are you paying your staff like $800 an hour? Because that's a story too, you know? Like, call them out. Okay, so in my infinite like Cancerian empathy, which is annoying to everyone that knows me, I'm like, well, what are they going through? What's going on their end? And honestly, it does kind of suck for some FOIA officers right now, particularly, you know, in the K-12 space and, you know, some of the healthcare spaces. It's just been incessant requests. There's been a lot of partisan, we know, ugliness, going after historically excluded communities. So, you know, some of these school districts, some of these agencies really are overwhelmed. And it's important to know, again, your homework about the spaces that you're requesting info from, because that empathy, that like understanding that negotiation can build, like, they'll move you up to the front of the line if they know you're not going to be a jerk about things. And you kind of get they're trying their best. And some are. This is just a quick study of the fees here in the US. But again, you can see that there's not a lot of clear law always about fees. So again, getting to know that in your states, and all that will be linked. So one of my favorite Canadian celebrities of all time, I love me some gifts. So again, always follow up, always appeal. You know, in the US, there are lots of mechanisms to do appeals, and this is from Nate Jones, who does FOIA work for the Washington Post, cited this. So think about, like, you're kind of like, well, negative Nancy in me wants to be, no slight to Nancy, love Nancy, but that psychology in me, the negative side of my brain, wants to go to like, oh, well, you know, 2 out of 3 I'm not going to get. But again, really gotta say that one out of 99, right? So you may get it. 1 out of 3 is pretty good, you know, and like, you know, it's just you got that no, and you got a lot going on, you know, in your work life and personal life. But there is success there. So, and that's from federal agencies. And I know a lot of us in our communities particularly have to deal with federal agencies, which can be such a labyrinth, right? Okay, so you've done all that, and you're like, oh, okay, none of that worked. So weirdly, people in power that have maybe other ambitions or interests, or are truly good stewards of their power, maybe like, yeah, I'm very passionate about childcare. I'm very passionate about welfare in our community, and I'm going to request those documents too. And I've done that with a city councilman who's really interested in Head Start, and he requested it, and I've been trying to get these documents for like weeks. And then he sent it to me, but I was like, well, I want to make sure that nothing was doctored, because trust no one. So I requested it right behind him. And then they were like, oh, well, you already have one of these in. I'm like, yeah, I know, but I know you just turned it over to the city councilman. I have a copy of it. We're going to run the story. So it'd be best if you sent me the same copy so I can make sure nothing was doctored and not get anything wrong for your agency. But I know you don't have to spend any more staff time than attaching it to an email and sending it to me. I know. So then they're like, okay, so then they sent me the data. Also, like, this is where I was raised Catholic, so my Catholic guilt really comes in. I would pit my school districts against each other with Catholic guilt sometimes. I had 16 school districts to cover, and I said, well, 14 of them sent me the data. Your 2 didn't. So do you want to be in the story listed that you're not giving the information to the public? Within a week, I had it. So sometimes, you know, you kind of have to play a little tough, but being sweet at the beginning tends to work in a lot of cases. And then again, you have the power of the pen. So write about the denial. People that care in your communities are watching that. I was reading, and I'm going to reference it later, but this great book that is sold in the bookstore here online about that approach. You know, writing about what information are you not getting. And that's really compelling for some of our communities, even if, yes, people aren't reading papers as much anymore, but we're online, and like, you know, that can go viral in a community. So don't deny it. You know, don't deny its appeal. And then also, some people love, you'll see this on the artist formerly known as X, or Twitter, on X now. Some people on their bio have screenshots of like when people are talking crap about them as journalists, because they've requested the processing notes of their request. And they'll be like, someone will be like, oh God, it's, you know, blank reporter again. And so sometimes you kind of want to know, you know, what are the inner workings, you know. So some journalists have taken that approach. In the never-ending 2016 campaign, we've been covering this topic. And so journalists have been trying to keep up with the fire hose of federal news when it comes to this aspect. But Politico was struggling getting some of the documents from the January 6th committee itself. They were saying, we're putting things together, we don't want anything jeopardized, but sometimes we know, like, the document's done, they just don't want to release it. And so they appealed to different agencies, and they were able to kind of hodgepodge some of that information together to write the story. It's different for every state. There are commissions. Find out if there's like some kind of a commission you can appeal to, an organization. The federal level, you have the OGIS. There's a link here. And then look up, like, I know on I think on MuckRock people list some of these sometimes like references to other cases, and like, well, in Wisconsin they had to release it, so you have to release it too. Like, this is a federal law. And then make sure you keep all your documentation through this process. And unfortunately, yes, you will possibly have to lawyer up at a certain point. So to wrap up, before we jump into questions, just some extra resources. Again, some product placement here for the great programming that you have at this conference. That press will be screened tonight. This is a lot of text, but I'm really hoping that this continues to kind of swell throughout the journalism community, because I think it has such great appeal, showing the power of local news and knowing your community. So this is tonight here on site with a great Q&A after. And then tomorrow, there's a session more specific with some folks here on press freedom in Indian country. And so, again, these sessions are like Jodi said, we need to keep doing more of them. A lot of our communities, I am Mexican American, and in our communities too, like, there are just not enough of us researching this. It's so easy to get deterred. So we're all here to be resources for you to make sure you're successful in your pursuit of open records. And y'all have been doing it for a long time in this community. I reread this on the flight here, and it was just pretty much, it's really a helpful guide. It's kind of tough to read sometimes and realize what hasn't changed, but there are elements of things that have gotten better. And this book ends on a positive note with some of that. There are constantly new resources that are coming out. So some of this is, if you're an IRE member, really appreciate the shout out, Dillon, on that. You can go into our resource center and look up a bunch of things. I was telling Jodi that, when I was trying to put together some materials, I noticed that some of the tip sheets about Indigenous journalists or covering Indigenous communities, Native communities, were not written by people from the community, and so excuse that, our institution, was like that too, was not very diverse for a very long time. And so, now we are trying to make sure that we're centering more of those voices, and we're gonna have a whole issue coming out soon, later this year, by all Indigenous journalists about investigative journalism. And so keep an eye out for that. Society of Environmental Journalists also does really great work on this issue, and centering voices. And then you have one of the, in my eyes, as someone who's DEI work, one of the OGs in the room with Jodi, who wrote from the Sneeman Reports issue that is still, again, very relevant in so many ways. NAJA has their own FOIA page, and then EWA has one on covering Native students. So here's the link again, if you missed it at the beginning, if you want to grab it, and all of our contact information. So with that, I think we got about 20 minutes for questions. And again, our info's here, my card's there. So I will turn it back over to y'all if anyone has any questions.
Go ahead.
Just briefly, but I want to turn it back over to you, just because I did not get to put it in here because of time, but I know the Student Press Law Center actually has a really great FOIA generator if you just want to, if you're brand new to this and want to start out. And then I know there's another, the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press also has a generator that you can experiment with. As far as automation, I'm not too sure, so I want to turn it back over to the panel if y'all have any, like, how do y'all do that?
Yeah, in Canada, the Secret Canada project that the Globe has put together, which is, yeah, led by Tom Cardoso and Robin Doolittle, with a lot of great developers as well. They have some really good templates on their, like, on the website that they've created. To my knowledge, there aren't any automation systems in Canada. Like, to my knowledge, MuckRock doesn't work in Canada. Or just, again, to my knowledge, like, I used to work in the States and used it all the time and found it really helpful. But so it is just like, it's also splintered too. So I just do everything kind of from scratch. Yeah.
I can speak to that because I'm actually working on a project right now that's like a ton of requests to tons of agencies across the United States for basically the same documents. At least on MuckRock, there's like a bulk file thing that you can do, which I found very helpful. So I start off with the same language, and then from there on, things just go off the rails. And I can't really give any more advice than maybe to have like a colleague or two working on it with you, and like each take a certain amount of requests and then have like maybe a Google Sheet tracking them, because they're going to go in all different directions. At least I found in the United States at like local levels, agencies respond very differently in different timelines, and it's just a lot of elbow grease reporting to follow up with all those agencies each step of the way.
Yeah, I feel like all of y'all have we've all done the freelancing, I'm assuming at some point, right? So, I mean, there is a group called Freelance Investigators and Reporters. And so Freelance Investigative Reporters and Editors. So it's FIRE. And so you should join them. And they put on a lot of programming. Laird Townsend runs that and has been a great partner of IRE on things. So I always think like first joining a community, just because it kind of reminds you, like when it comes up on your phone or you get the newsletter, like, oh, I've been meaning to put in that FOIA. So what's one way to kind of hold yourself accountable? I mean, build it into your budgets when you're doing your story pitches. Those are probably the two top tips. But all of us have done freelance here, so it can be kind of hard sometimes, setting calendar reminders, things like that. And there's like fun sometimes for, helping with FOIA in your projects. Like yesterday was the Fund of Funders, and some of those folks there, working to help do more like in-depth investigative journalism with freelancers too. What about y'all?
The Society of Professional Journalists also has a very active freelance community. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but you might want to check them out also. And they do have a page on the SBJ website.
But I think it's a really good question, because I feel like for myself, at least, like the way that I've learned a bit is a lot of it's just through talking to colleagues. Like when I was working at the Globe, like, Tom Cardoso was somebody who, I'll give a shout out to. Like, sometimes I'd be like, hey, like, do you know of any cases where like there was an appeal about this and it was successful? And he's just kind of a bit of a walking encyclopedia on ATIP. So, or like, even just my colleague now, Katrina Clark, and I were talking the other day, and she was writing a story about D&D and redactions in D&D records. That's our Defense Department. And she mentioned, like, oh, she was going to write about, and this story's published, you know, the redactions were done in white. And I was like, and there had been actually a decision from the Information Commissioner about CSIS saying you shouldn't be doing redactions in white because nobody can tell where it's been taken out. And so she was mentioning that, and I was like, oh, I have a file that I just got with redactions in white. And then so I followed up on my existing complaint with being like, and I also want to complain about the white redactions. So I feel like it's a really good question. I don't know what the answer is, but just like, because I feel like so much is like talking with colleagues like about this issue.
Are you in the US? Yeah, actually, I didn't do it personally, but I've done a lot of writing on press freedom, and Brian Pollard did the Red Press Initiative survey for NAJA, and he's currently working on a dissertation as part of, I believe, a master's program, and he's actually looking at every tribal constitution. So when I was doing some of my column writing, while I was a JSK fellow, I'd go to Brian a lot, and because he was researching this, and that's what I started asking: how many tribes actually address freedom of information or have something, you know, codified within their constitutions or, you know, somewhere else within the tribal governance sections, and that was the number that he had come up with. Of all the constitutions that he had examined. And then just generally, you know, if you look on the NAJA website, there's a lot of resources about FOIA. And I think we could all list the tribes that have taken the steps to make sure that freedom of information is readily accessible for tribal citizens. So Grand Ronde is one of the tribes, Muskogee Media, Navajo has done special protections, Cherokee, and I know I'm probably missing one, but those are the kind of our perennial examples of tribes that are taking the right steps to make freedom of information more available.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Sure.
I'm actually from Grand Ronde.
Yeah. I think I met Danielle before. Yeah.
So 5, 6, that's about the same number of like tribes that have free press.
Yeah.
Is there, I know Grand Ronde we have both, but is there like common overlap with these other tribes that have both?
That they have both. What were the two again that you guys?
Freedom of information and free press laws.
There might be some overlap, and then, you know, not everybody actually calls it freedom of information too. So, but I can't remember. Does Grand Ronde have Freedom of Information Act? Yeah. Yeah. Yep. So that was some of the language that we're dealing with, but if they all fell within the general parameters, I just want to give a shout out to Grand Ronde because of their accountability they have in their finances.
I was in the editor's office. I can't remember his name, or is he the publisher? But they had a tabloid-sized document on the end table, and I just picked it up and started looking at it, and I think I made him a little bit nervous because it was information that gets sent out specifically to tribal members, and it's accounting of how all their finance spending, which, you know, the casino gave X amount of dollars to the cultural committee, and this is how much interest they earned on their foundation. I might be oversimplifying that, but it was the most complete record of financial oversight I've ever seen a tribe do, coming from a tribe that nobody even knows how much our casino makes. So I'd like to use that as an example somewhere along the line for other tribes to follow. If I can get that document back, because it was taken away from me. Yeah, go ahead.
I reported Oklahoma covering tribes, and I would also say the Eastern Shawnee tribe has a very similar accounting system.
Which tribe?
Eastern Shawnee, and they publish it in their tribal newspaper. Check it out. It sounds very similar to what Freetown does.
Yeah, I'll have to add that to the list of good examples then. Yeah.
But I actually had a follow-up question about in Oklahoma, you know, one of the things we face is just non-responsiveness from the state government. I mean, we file these requests and it's like throwing them into the wind. And even follow-ups, you know, we just don't get a lot of response to them. And I just wondered, you know, how you approach that when you don't necessarily have a budget to begin filing like the legal process.
Okay. Sorry, okay. So, I mean, that is like, that's why I showed that clip for Chicago, you know, and people think Illinois has better public records laws. It just really depends on the culture of the spaces that you're looking into and working and covering. So, I mean, the reality is that you have to go to the official channels to say, you know, it's like what we call like a corporation sometimes, and we know they're going to say no comment, but you know, you have to do it, right? So you go through the process that way, but reporters like Jason Leopold, who's kind of well known in this space for doing a lot of FOIA work, he's come to several of our conferences and said, like, it takes me years sometimes to get that information. And I really rely on people just turning it over to me sometimes. You know, like working your sources and someone sending it to you under the table or anonymously, right? And so in spaces like that, you know, trying to constantly appeal to the psychology of this is not for me, this is not for my news organization, this is for the community, this is for the people you serve, this is for the taxpayers, you know, this is for our members of our space. And continuously trying to appeal to that to the people in power. Like I said, you know, trying one agency, if you can't get through that one, is there any intersection where another agency would have that document? There's not a one pathway to it, and you kind of have to figure it out over time. And sometimes you luck out with someone in power who's more open to it, and they'll change the culture there. But, you know, a lot of times you really just have to build the trust of those that maintain the info and hope that in the space of that, you know, stonewalling that you would get you know, that information eventually. And then there are funds. I know that the National Freedom of Information Coalition has grants. And I thought SPJ used to have grants. I'm not sure if they still anymore.
They do.
Yeah, so there's groups like that, you know, if you need to lawyer up. And then we've seen like in Uvalde, so I'm from San Antonio, Texas, you know, we've seen like when these organizations get together and all sue. And that's really helped reduce the cost amongst the group. And once an agency or an elected official see that, they're like, oh, okay. And so, you know, they've been successful in Texas getting a lot of those really horrible videos and documents that really changed the narrative of that case through banding together.
Yeah, and I would just add two other resources to that actually as well. I think if you're familiar with any lawyers in like academic institutions or academic settings in Oklahoma who work on kind of access issues, they may just out of the bottom of their heart be interested and like take a look at the request and talk it over with you, or talk over, you know, what kind of next steps you could do to escalate the situation. A lot of states in the United States also have like a open government foundation. I'm thinking like in New Mexico, there was NMFOG. So like when I was at Searchlight New Mexico, we always kind of escalated things up to NMFOG after having trouble with a specific agency. And then, yeah, I would just echo everything Francisco said, and sometimes just waiting. Like, you wouldn't believe the things that happen when leadership changes in an agency. I filed some requests for use of force reports from police in New Mexico while I was living in New Mexico, and then like 3 years later, leadership changed, and all of a sudden they just appeared in my email, like, you know, and it had just gone down the drain. At some point I just realized they're never going to respond to me, but then something changes and the culture is changing at that agency, and then you send that person a very polite thank you note and try to figure out how, you know, when culture is changing, how to really make sure you're getting the records on the timelines you expect, and then hopefully in the future, then that will be the basis, or that will be kind of the standard.
Yeah, I want to add that I've been talking with the founder of MuckRock, Michael Morrissey, about creating a special project within MuckRock to specifically track requests regarding tribes to federal agencies, so we know who's responding, and again, to encourage more Indigenous people to use the MuckRock FOIA system, so we know what's happening out there. So we'll see where that goes. Okay, well, we just have a few more minutes. Anybody else on the panel have something you would like to say? Yeah.
No, I'm really glad you all came here at 9 a.m. in the morning during a conference to come learn about, you know, open records. And a lot of times I feel like when I go to sessions, it's like I need to marinate a little on things and be like, okay, so, you know, you have all of our contact information, and seriously, like, we say yes to this because we do want to help. So take us up on our offer, even if it's 3 months from now. Like, make sure to get that info, save it somewhere, you know, you can come back to, because you just don't know when you'll need it. I mean, we can't control the news cycle, so, right, you know, you go back to your newsroom and you're all like ready to go, right? And then like there's a bus wreck or something, you have to cover it, or like something else drops with someone in power you got to cover. And so it's like you really have to build into your calendar time to do this. So, you know, before you leave, set a calendar invite in a month that you're going to come back to this presentation. Like, do it right now so that you know, and then it proves to kind of whoever empowered you to come, if you're with the news organization, to be like, yeah, like I'm ready to follow up on this, and I've had some time.
Oh, I just wanted to plug as well, join the MuckRock Slack, because we have a few channels for different types of questions. So you can reach out to me directly, you have my email there, but also that Slack channel is great for just asking questions about any problems you're having, and someone from MuckRock will often answer it, or just other members of the Slack channel will like chime in and give you some feedback on whatever kind of questions you may have.
Yeah, the only thing I would just say is if there's anyone who wants to stick behind and kind of go through the Canadian portals and get some help with where to look, I'm happy to try and go through it, and I might not know the answer.
Yeah, and just, to follow up on all the information that we just learned here today, I think it's just really important just to jump right into it. I know a number of people, our newsrooms have like FOIA Fridays, like they'll just file a FOIA request on Friday just for fun, or to follow up on something more significant. So make it a daily part or a weekly part of your practice. And I really appreciate everybody being here in the morning, all the early risers. Good job, and enjoy the rest of the conference. So thank you.